Good morning, and thank you for coming. And thank you especially to the Hutchins Center for hosting this event today. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the program, and then I'm going to give you a talk to motivate why we're having this event. So today, after my introduction, we're going to host three panels that are going to discuss three topics. I hope you all picked up a handout on the way in that describes the program. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience today, so I hope that we can offer you something that you don't already know, and we look forward to your engagement with questions through our panels. Rather than give you a longer introduction about the schedule, I'm going to jump right into the topic of student loans and give you an overview of some salient facts to help frame and motivate the conversation we're about to have. Do my slides work? No. What's that? Oh, there we go. Perfect. So to frame this event, I want to start off with a couple facts. One is that college has long been viewed as a key pathway to the middle class, and for very good reasons. In the labor market, workers with bachelor's degrees earn a lot more than individuals without degrees, roughly $500,000 more over the course of their lifetime. They're more likely to be employed. They have a higher quality of life on a wide variety of measures, and those are believed to be caused by the educational investments they make. And for many students, those educational degrees are a ticket to the middle class. So according to research from Brookings, children from the bottom fifth of the income distribution have a 41% chance of reaching the top income quintiles if they earn a college degree, but only a 14% chance if they do not. And the educational institutions that provide this upward lift are mid-tier, they're not selective, they're public institutions, and there are thousands of them across the country. And so there are good schools everywhere that help propel students up the income ladder. And that's given rise to this belief that college is a pathway to the middle class. And then along comes this student loan crisis that has totally shaken our faith in this belief. As is widely known, between 2004 and 2018, the outstanding volume of student debt leapt from $250 billion to $1.5 trillion. Student loans are now the largest non-mortgage source of household debt in the United States. Borrowers clearly struggle with these loans. Last year, student loans had the highest delinquency rate of any form of household debt. And we read almost every day a story of how some former student suffers under the burden of some outlandish debt load, like the dentist who has $1 million in student debt, or a single parent who owes $77,000. And so we clearly have too many student loan borrowers who regret their choices, who feel like they were fooled or misled, or who feel burdened by the loans that they've taken out. And that is a real problem. That is a real problem, first of all, for the reasons I said, that there are big gains to college, and it can be a pathway to the middle class. Second, financial aid and loans in particular play a central role in providing access to college for low and middle income students. This chart just shows the fraction of fraction of individuals who attend college by age 22, the dark blue line. The fraction who attend college by age 22 by their parents' rank in the income distribution. So what you can see from this is that almost all high-income students, children from high-income families, go to college at a traditional time, but fewer than half of low-income students are enrolled at that age. And there's some catch-up between age 22 and age 32. Many fewer lower-income students ever go to college. And when they do, a larger share of them go during a time in their life where they have more responsibility. The students from low and middle income families that do go to college are heavily reliant on financial aid, grants and loans for most of or a large share of their educational expenses. And absent those loans, fewer low and middle income students would get to go to college. And indeed, the well-intentioned desire to increase access to college for these low and middle income students is a key reason why we are in this mess. Over time, the federal government has regularly expanded the amount it lends and the circumstances in which it makes federal loans available. This chart shows loan originations per full-time student going back to 1970. What you can see is that we expanded in the 80s eligibility for who gets a student loan and the institutions that were eligible to participate. In the 90s, we expanded federal loans to borrowers from higher income families and families in particular without financial need. We have regularly increased the amounts that we lend, both to undergraduates, to graduates and parents. And as a result, the number of institutions that participate in the loan program and the amounts that are available for students has increased a lot over time. And so one thing that federal expansion and aid achieved was that it allowed more students to borrow and to borrow in much larger amounts. This chart shows data on household student borrowing in 2001. It shows that the average student loan balance in the entire population by income percentile. So the way that you would read this chart is to say that the average household in the top 10% of the income distribution in 2001 owed just under $4,000 in student debt. Obviously, most households didn't owe student debt, but those that did owed more than $4,000. But what you can see is that almost no low-income households owed any debt. Only about 4% of households had any, and when they did, they owed an average of about $6,000. And the largest balances were owed by the highest income households. About 11% of top income households had debt, and they owed large amounts, about $35,000 per borrower in the top 10%. And that, by and large, worked out fine in the sense that the amounts people borrowed were commensurate with their earnings. It allowed them to make payments. Households were not burdened, and taxpayers, by and large, were held harmless. And then here is 2016. You can see that there are big increases in how much households owe in student debt across the board. There are twice as many households who have debt, and the average amount that is owed is about twice as high. The largest absolute increase is among the upper middle class, not those in the top 10%, but those in the next 10%. But the largest percentage increases are among low-income households who had rarely borrowed at all in the past. And this pattern of rising indebtedness has big intergenerational differences. Nationwide, about 1 in 5 households owes any student debt. For households under 30, that number is about half. And if we were looking at the class of students who had graduated last year, almost 70% of them had owed some student debt. Partly this is because of increases in tuition, but tuition increases are actually only a small direct contributor to rising indebtedness. In addition, many more low-income students have borrowed to attend some college, but have not necessarily a high-quality college or a college that they necessarily completed. More middle and upper middle class households have borrowed to attend graduate programs. And to some extent, today's students get less help from their families or their parents. They have less money to contribute out of pocket or fewer sources of other financing. And hence they use student loans to finance a larger share of their education than they have in the past. Because children in upper and middle income families are more likely to go to college, and because college graduates by and large earn more, this chart also shows that a large share of debts are owed by higher income and better educated households. You can also see that in this chart, which shows the share of borrowers and the share of outstanding debt by educational attainment. For instance, this chart shows that, households headed by someone with a graduate degree make up only 26% of households. They owe almost half of the all student debt. In contrast, 42% of households with student loans don't have a BA, but they only owe 24% of all the student debt. So debt is concentrated among higher income and more highly educated households, but I think a lot of the pain from student loans is concentrated among this other group that don't have a bachelor's degree. Indeed, that's the type of group that struggles the most in terms of default. So this chart shows default rates by the institution type last attended, and also by educational attainment and race and ethnicity. So the chart on the left-hand side, for instance, shows that default rates at for-profit schools and to a lesser extent community colleges are quite high. And the students who default, they've often pursued certificates and associate's degrees rather than traditional BA degrees. And students who default are much more likely to be lower income, to be first-generation students, to be members of minority groups, in part because of the challenges they face and the wealth and income that they have to finance their educational attainment, and also because of the types of schools and the types of degrees that they pursue. But it's important to recognize also that people who attain bachelor's degrees do quite well. We saw that in their earnings. We see that in their default rates in this chart. And it's important to realize that most students who earn a BA leave college with reasonable loan balances and a high-quality education. So this chart, for instance, just shows that most undergraduates leave college with reasonable amounts of debt. So this chart, for instance, shows that about 30% of individuals who graduated in 2012 with a bachelor's degree after completing, typically 4 years of college, 30% of them had no debt, 23% had a loan but owed less than $20,000, and 70% of them graduate with a BA degree owing less than $30,000. And if you look more narrowly at those students who attended public and private nonprofits, the share that leave school with relatively large balances is small. Among those graduating in 2012, for instance, a third at public four-year schools didn't owe any debt, and 80% owe less than $30,000. And finally, over the last several years, we've implemented a host of income-based repayment plans, which have limited the amounts that students have to repay each month based on their income, capping those payments typically at less than 10% of their discretionary, or capping those payments at 10% of their discretionary income, which is a smaller share of their total income. And forgiving those balances over a period of time, 20 years if they're undergraduate students, 25 years if they have some graduate debt. As a result of those and some other changes we've made in our repayment system, despite the fact that loan burdens have increased across the board, the monthly debt payments of student loan borrowers conditional on having a student loan hasn't changed very much over time. And so that means that, for instance, among lower income borrowers, they actually are paying less on a monthly basis. And that's true almost across the board, with the exception of this kind of the group between 80 and 90% in the income distribution. That doesn't mean that their loan burdens are in some ways less salient to them. Their loan balances in many of these cases are not going down, and I'm sure that the debt still hangs over their heads. But the relief that these programs have provided is important because it means that they have kind of more cash on hand to finance their day-to-day lives. So to conclude, students and their families owe more debt than ever. Many struggle with their loans, especially those who don't complete their degree or who borrow to attend certain types of programs. But many borrowers do very well, especially those who earn a degree or especially a bachelor's degree, who graduate with reasonable loan balances. And we've done a good job, I think, of developing new ways for those borrowers to manage those debts. Thank you. I look forward to our discussion.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.